got done playing through Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of Earth, and I give it a 1.5 out of 4. Um, when it's good, it's an outright 3 out of 4. Problem is, a lot of parts are utterly wretched. Um, Put simply, Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of Earth is a bit of a. It's an interesting one because it's something where it starts off quite well. That is, once you've gone through the fairly painful process of actually getting the fucking thing working. For the record, this is the PC version, so for all I know, the console version on the Xbox may well be absolutely fine and may well be a much better game. Point is, the PC version is an absolute dreck to get going, but once it's done, you can enjoy a fairly decent first act. The game reminds me actually a lot of the later Naughty Dog titles in that there's not it like specifically the first Uncharted, the one where the gameplay wasn't actually all that good, but it was well paced. That's kind of Cthulhu's big sort of good point, is it's well paced at least at the start before it starts throwing up roadblocks left and right. You can pretty much end up just sort of enjoying the game because you're doing something different fairly regularly, and the story's moving at a nice speed. Like when people talk about pace, does something have good or bad pace? Let me say what's bad pace. And bad pace would be something like the library level from the first Halo, which is what I would call an infamous case of bad pacing, because it's a case of doing the same fucking thing over and over again. Like, even if Halo has good core combat, you repeat it too much without throwing in new ideas, and that's what I call bad pace. Cthulhu doesn't really have much depth to it. Like, the game's peak is near the start, escape sequence, which is basically just any Uncharted escape sequence, but you're in first person, and there's a bit of stealth here and there. Stealth isn't in depth, there's nothing to it. You can't distract enemies, there's no real ability to mess with your AI in any interesting ways. You can basically just move about and try and not get seen, and that's about it. Platforming, there's first person platforming, it's first person platforming, and that sort of there's some fairly easy puzzles, and that's basically the first third of the game, and that's when it's at its peak. And I'm saying right now that peak is to me like it's a 3 out of 4, as in it's actually kind of interesting. It's moving nicely. The fact that there's not much depth doesn't matter because I'm still entertained. No issues. Certain things that the health system is a bit of a feels like one of those ambitious and ideas which doesn't actually make much sense. Same for the sanity. These are the game's two big gimmicks. Neither of them I think are any good. Sanity basically just means if you look at certain things for too long, the game's screen gets all blurry and it tries to make you feel slightly sick, which I'm like, okay, congrats, but I still don't think it does much. Health is basically that Metal Gear system from Metal Gear 3. Metal Gear 3, classic game, some ideas, because so much of that game is so good, I think some of its worst ideas have been elevated to be better than they were, and one of those would be its health system, where you could like fix different limbs and stuff like this. For all I know, Cthulhu may have came out before it, so I don't know. I'm not keeping an eye on the times for the releases. Point is, it's just kind of you can you click on all your body parts instead of just pressing heal. It doesn't do much, and it just takes up a bit more time, I guess. You can sort of not heal your legs, I guess, and you gotta have, but the resources aren't really low enough that you ever have to prioritize, say, a gun arm over a leg, so it doesn't really matter. Now we get to where it goes to shit, and that's kind of where it introduces guns. Now, I want to state straight up that this isn't strictly because guns bad, and it's not even because the gunplay is bad. It's got about as much depth as the rest of the gameplay, which is to say, not a ton. You can shoot people in the head for a quick kill or riddle them with bullets. I don't really have this gross dislike of like, oh god, they put guns in a Cthulhu game, and I'm like, I don't, what, who cares? I don't mind splattering Fistman with shotgun rounds. It's not that far from Resident Evil, and I like Resident Evil, where Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft like theme doesn't make me suddenly hate this stuff. The real issue has nothing to do with the guns and more of how messy the game starts to get at that point. First of all, the second stage where you're using guns is one of the worst stages in the game. It's just overly long and tedious. The game's puzzles also get more and more bullshitty and annoying. The first puzzle which really pissed me off was before you get guns, and that's one where you have to there's an area guarded by two guys. You've got to get in, and you think, and there's a truck on the top of a hill. Now, what you're meant to do is push the truck down the hill and jump in the truck and ride it down the hill over like a 10-meter drop, at which point you get out of the truck and are fine. Now, the whole game up to this point has taught you that if you fall 2 meters, you break your legs. So this doesn't make a ton of sense, but that's the solution. First, you'll probably try just pushing the truck down and running by the guards, but sometimes the AI is dumb enough that lets you, but the actual proper intended thing is to jump in this truck and go over this cliff face. It's not a cliff, it's into a sewer, but you get my point. Then you have to jam up a propeller while being shot at by those two guards, and to get into the sewer, a fan. This should be really easy because you have an obvious item to use to jam the fan. Problem is that you can actually interact with the fan and have your guy do a generic "it's a fan, I should jam that up with something" line, without actually being able to use the item on fan. Like, it's very point and click adventure-y, but then some of that point and click adventure stuff doesn't really work. So I initially thought, okay, there must be some other solution because I keep trying to use this thing and he keeps saying I can't do that. And then it turns out what you need to do is you don't have to be close enough with a fan for him to like press a button and he sees the fan. You have to walk all the way right next to the fan and then use that item. So I spent a while just bullshitting around with that. And it just sort of gets worse from there on out. There's sort of a mix of places where sometimes it turned out I kept checking guides because sometimes it would be because there was a bug and I had to mess around outside of a game to fix it. And sometimes it would just be a really convoluted solution. The problem is it doesn't have that adventure. For as bad as some adventure game puzzles can be, they don't have that problem of you dying and going back to a checkpoint. So when some puzzles have you jump off a straight cliff, or into like jump down a pit, even if there's air coming out it, you're initially not sure. But they get worse and worse with like there's no way someone's gonna beat this thing without dying for people who beat Ninja Gaiden 2 on Ninja Master without getting a single hit are not gonna beat this thing without a bunch of deaths, just because a ton of them are just bullshit you can't see come in. The game's rules jump all over the place. Sometimes you have to platform for tiny ledges you don't think you should actually be able to stand on, but other times you'll try and jump onto something and it turns out it's just thin air. Like there's a block there, but the game treats it as thin air and you fall to your death. Other times it just treats it's like a small block as like a massive invisible wall. This stuff happens a ton. And when you mix that in with actual stuff, which is just bugs you need to go out of the game to fix, it made the whole second half really unbearable to play through. So it's not the guns, it's how much this shit starts to pop up. So would I recommend it? The answer is no. You could always at some point, there may be fans, crazy and dedicated enough to really patch this shit up, fix all the things, and generally go over. I mean, this feels like something which needed like play testing in the second half. Because I know people might say you're being too casual for this thing, but the game isn't difficult. Like, I played on a normal difficulty, which I'm sure you can complain that I didn't go straight for hard, and usually I do on a lot of stuff, but in this I didn't trust it. Like, if I have to, if it's a game in itself to get running, I'm not going to assume you made well balanced difficulty levels, so normal, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. But yeah, the actual when it comes to gunning people down and having enough resources, all that survival horror stuff, I had tons of resources, tons of health items, tons of ammo. Never was needing. The only time I was needing is the game has this weird tendency in the second half to have you get captured and have your weapons taken away, and then for you to get them back like 5 minutes later, and it does it multiple times. It actually makes the if you are mad about there's some bosses there, some are painfully bad, some are okay. It's if you don't like the idea of killing like Dagon or Hydra, you might find this upsetting to your Lovecraft mythos, must be bad ending. So it's a yeah, its ending feels like a run up to a possible sequel, I guess. Personally, like I some of the stuff people would probably complain about, but like gunning down half of Endsmouth, I'm like it's it's not that far from some of the stuff that's happened in that story. Hey, but I would still really recommend this only as a curiosity. This is something I've wanted to play through for a while. Like, I remember I started it years back and thought the first two stages were pretty cool. Now I've played through it, I'd say the first two stages are pretty cool. But other parts are just utterly wretched.